That's one of the ideas that I did not come up with. It was Marion Hargrove's idea to do a spoof on Gunsmoke. And I said, Marion, there's an old saying that satire is something that dies on Saturday night. So I will do the spoof on Gunsmoke, but we're going to spoof it realistically. And so I came up with a story. And it was a story. So we weren't relying on our spoof to get by. This had a story. But it did have this great big sheriff who keeps trying to run Maverick out of town. And Marion wrote it, and I rewrote it. Marion quarreled about it, and I said, sorry, Marion, that the things I rewrote weren't funny. And he would say things like, what do you know about humor? Now, here was a man who had a right to say that. Marion Hargrove had written a book called See Here, Private Hargrove that sold more copies than any book in the history of the world except the Bible during World War II. And it was funny. So Marion Hargrove was funny, and he did understand comedy. But he also had a fault, and that was he didn't really care whether what he thought was funny was also believable. And I had a theory that if something isn't true, it isn't funny. And we were in conflict on this point. I have never changed, and I don't think Marion Hargrove's ever changed. But anyway, he went on the set, and he got Leslie Martinson to do things that were not in the script. Like every time the stalwart sheriff would say, I'm going to go do something, the madam in the saloon would say, oh, Matt, or whatever his name was, be careful. And he'd go to her. And it was all through the script. It was all through not in the script, it was all through the shot material. And other things like that were just pure camp. They weren't funny. And I said, Marion, what in hell? Get out, stay off the set. And I talked to Les, and I said, Les, stop listening to Marion. What's funny about it? What is it? What has it got to do with Gunsmoke? He doesn't do that. So it's neither in our spoof nor is this funny. And, arguing about what's funny is like, arguing about whether the Republicans or the Democrats should win.
But there is one scene that I think is the classic moment from that episode. Maybe you can describe it for us. When Maverick and the sheriff do step into the street for the classic shootout.
Marion wrote that, and I left it alone because it was funny.
How'd it go?
Well, it was just the sheriff shoots and misses because the distance is too far, and Maverick knows it. And Maverick says, I think maybe you're too far, Sheriff. You want to try again? Or something like that. It was funny. Gunshy was a non-Maverick. The New York Times. Now, let me tell you what I did. I said to Marion and to Martinson, look, this show has got to be re-edited. Because Marion was in the editing room, along with Martinson and the editor. I said, this show has to be re-edited, but I'm going to do something for you guys. I'm going to say in the straightest voice and with the straightest face I can, I'm going to get people around here to come and look at this episode. And I swear to you, and you'll know whether I lie, I'm going to ask them to look at a Maverick I just did. I'm not going to tell them why they're looking at it. And I didn't. And they knew I didn't. Because if I had, they would have heard about it within 5 seconds. I got together 20 people from Warner Brothers and people that I respected and showed them this episode, including my friend Howard Brown. And when the thing ended, there was silence. And then Howard got up and said, Roy, I suppose we're here because you think this is good and funny. And as your old friend, I have to tell you it's neither good nor funny. Now, Howard Brown's still alive. And so I'm not quoting someone who's dead and can't deny it. And then everyone else in the room started speaking up saying, Roy, it's dreadful. It's just terrible. It's not funny. And I said, I know it isn't. I said, now for the first time, I said, look, let me tell you something. I ran this because I can't convince my two friends, Martinson and Hargrove, and my editor, that this isn't funny. Now I can. Or at least I can tell them why I'm re-editing it. I re-edited it and brought in another group and told Marion about it. Marion said, something contemptuous about the people who looked at it. I don't know what it was. And when I ran it again, I said, Marion, you want to come and see this thing? He said, no, I don't want to see it. And I ran it with another group who found it sort of amusing. And so went on the air that way, and the New York Times said it was dreadful. And it was. I hated it. And it was only I forget what you called it, Lee, a landmark
classic
show.
Or
a classic,
episode.
Because the other reviewers are all idiots. And they all loved it. They probably would have loved the first one, although I doubt that. But they loved this version, which I was willing to put out, because I had gotten rid of this and all kinds of other awful stuff. But the New York Times wasn't taken in by all the propaganda. Marion Hargrove was out giving interviews about this great show that was coming up. And of course, it had the biggest rating we'd had up to that time. But the New York Times was not going to be conned by anything that Marion Hargrove had to say to them. And they didn't like it.